Hello and welcome to Into the Woods with Holly Worton. This podcast is all about our journey into the woods of ourselves, getting to know who we are, where we are, and where we're going in life so that we can create the life that we want to live. It's about deepening your connection with yourself, taking inspired action, and really trusting yourself and your intuition. It's also about mindset. Our beliefs are such an important part of this journey. And there are so many ways for us to change our mindset so that we can more easily live a life of expansive joy. This podcast is also about going literally into the woods and spending time in nature, and how that can help us on our own personal journey of self-knowledge. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now let's get into this week's episode. Hello, adventurers, and welcome to the Into the Woods podcast, episode 400. 400! Yay! This is your host, Holly Worton, and I'm back with another solo episode. Today, I'm going to reflect on the last 399 episodes of this podcast and talk a little bit about my journey and talk a little bit about how life is like an ultra. I was just thinking about this earlier today, and talk about how you can stick with things even when they seem hard, or even when they might not feel right anymore, or even when you're thinking about quitting, and what to do. So, I have a bunch of notes, and it's taken me a while to kind of put them together because I had all these kind of random thoughts for this episode, and hopefully this will be coherent because I have mapped it out. So I was reflecting on this podcast over the years. 7.5, almost 8 years ago, I was listening to podcasts, and I couldn't find the exact podcast I wanted to listen to. I wanted to listen to a podcast that featured women entrepreneurs, women online entrepreneurs, and I couldn't find one. Now, there are tons of podcasts like this, but at the time I couldn't find anything, and I was asking online, and no one could point me in the right direction, and so I thought, well, I guess I'm going to have to start this thing. So this podcast started out talking about women entrepreneurs. I did primarily, actually solely interviews in the beginning. Then I started doing some solo episodes, mostly talking about social media marketing and that kind of thing. And then over time, this morphed into the Business Mindset podcast, which it was for quite a while. And then it kind of started going more into kind of the personal development and personal mindset area. And then last year, I really stepped into talking about outdoor adventures, and now I'm talking more about plant and tree communication, which is kind of a weird combination. And the way I organize it in my head is that the plant and tree communication stuff is kind of like adventures in consciousness. And I plan to do at least one episode a month talking about that. So one of my listeners thanked me for my episode the other week with Cara Wild, and she asked me if I could get an animal communicator on and a crystal communicator on. So I've got the animal communicator lined up. We've just got to get a date in the calendar. And I've invited the crystal person, and we shall see. So I've got some interesting people coming on the show, hopefully, to talk about those things. And outdoors adventures, it's a huge part of my life. And I love talking to people about their outdoor adventures. And we'll be both talking about those in solo episodes and interviews. And who knows where this podcast is going to go? You know, I'm very lucky in that I have not missed a week in 400 weeks. And even when I felt like I had nothing to say, I dug deep and I found something meaningful and hopefully interesting to share with you. I don't think I ever created an episode just to put one out. I feel like I always manage to find an interesting and useful topic. But honestly, when I started this thing, I didn't think about the future. I didn't think about where I would be in 7.5, 8 years. I don't think I ever thought I'd still be doing it 400 episodes later. As I was reflecting on that, I was also thinking about my blogging, because I started blogging in 2006, and I'm still blogging, on and off, but I'm still blogging. Many, many years later, 15 years later, which is wild. So there are all these things that I've been doing on and off or continuously over the years. And running is another thing. You know, I used to be a big runner in my late 20s, and then I kind of quit, and then I picked it up, but I wasn't really into it. And then last year I picked it up and fell back in love, and I've just been on fire ever since. So there are all these things, both kind of creative ventures and physical adventures that, as I say, I've either been doing consistently or I've been doing inconsistently for many years. And I think this is a useful topic because there are so many things that we get into that we think are a good idea, we think are fun, or we think we should do, or we just start doing for whatever reason. And we keep going and going and going, and sometimes we want to give up, we want to quit. And sometimes quitting is the right choice, and sometimes, maybe it's not. So I talked about this a few weeks ago in episode 395, How to Know When to Quit Your Adventures. And that was based on a marathon length run that I did where I really wanted to quit and didn't, and then ended up being really pleased that I didn't. And then last weekend, I did a 50-kilometer walk just in my local area, just walked out of my house. We have so many trails where I live, it's really easy to just walk and walk and walk and stay in the same area. And I was really pleased with that. It went really, really well. My long distance walking has really improved. And I'm kind of shocked about how the running is helping the walking and the walking is helping the running. And it's like the cross training is really helping. And my 50-kilometer walk and my 45-kilometer walks were so much easier than my 30 or 35-kilometer walks. I think just because my body's adapting. It's recovering faster afterwards, and it's just doing really well during the walk. I mean, I remember, I think it must have been my 35-kilometer walk. My feet hurt so bad, and I was so tired. Oh, and I remember it was dark, and I was walking. I was very close to home. I was like the last half hour of my walk. And I was walking through this trail that had a lot of benches. And I just sat on every bench. It was like I would get up and I would walk a few paces and then I would sit on the next bench. And then I would get up and walk a few paces and sit on the next bench. And that was how I made it the last bit home. And my last two walks, even though they were so much longer, were so much easier. So there are so many benefits of sticking with things, learning along the way, training, developing resilience, learning from your adventures, and making things better. A couple walks ago, it was super muddy. My feet got wet. It was miserable. So last time I wore waterproof socks and my feet were fine. So, you learn things with every adventure, with everything that you do. And you learn, you adapt, you pivot. It's like with this podcast, changing. I've pivoted the topic of the podcast so many times as I changed, as I grew, as I developed into different interests. And I think it's very, very important to remember that pivoting, adapting, changing is always an option. If things are tough, if things are no longer joyful, if things are no longer fun, you don't necessarily need to quit something. You can pivot, you can adapt, you can change. Or you could just soldier on through, force your way to the end, or to the next step, or whatever. It depends on what kind of experience you want to have. So, in that episode 395 where I talked about how to know when to quit your adventures, that was very, very kind of specific to physical adventures. But with life stuff, creative adventures, ask yourself, why do you want to quit? Will you regret quitting? And why are you doing this in the first place? This is such an important question to ask. Because there have been so many times with this podcast where I've been like, it's not feeling right. What am I going to do with it? And so I've changed. Either I quit taking interviews, or I started having a very good friend that I knew I could have a good conversation with, do monthly episodes with, like Joe Casey, like Joanna Hennon. Or I brought interviews back. I didn't do solo episodes in the beginning, and then I started doing solo episodes. So it was like I made all these little changes that made a huge difference in my experience of creating this podcast. And you can do the same. So whatever creative adventure or physical adventure or outdoor adventure or adventure in consciousness or life adventure, whatever thing it is that you're doing that you're thinking, I don't know what to do with this. Do I quit? Do I keep going? Think about how you can change it. Or take a break. There's nothing wrong with taking a break. Plenty of people take breaks from podcasts. I've taken breaks from running. I've taken breaks from blogging. I've taken breaks from all kinds of things, and I've gone back. You might learn during the break that you don't want to go back, or you might realize that you missed it and you want to go back. Another question to ask yourself is, can you get support? So like for me with this podcast, as I said, there have been times where I've had very good friends do monthly episodes with me, and that really helped. I knew these were people that I could have a useful, interesting conversation with that would be useful to other people, and we had a lot to talk about. So they were supporting me by coming on every month, and we were having these conversations that I knew would be interesting and useful to people. So that was a way of getting support. There are so many ways you can get support. And as I always talk about mindset, there's also mindset support, because sometimes when we want to quit, it's our mindset getting in the way. It's our fears, our blocks, our limiting beliefs that are kind of rising up and saying, oh, who do you think you are? Who do you think you are to be doing this thing? Who do you think you are to be doing a podcast? Who do you think you are to be writing a blog? Who do you think you are to be writing these books? You're not an expert. Who do you think you are? That is one of the most common blocks that people have. I'm not good enough to do this thing that I want to do. I'm not good enough to walk an ultra marathon or run an ultra marathon. I'm not good enough to express myself in this way or do this art or do whatever. It is such a common thing. So if you're feeling like quitting something, think about that. Think about your mindset. Is it really that it doesn't feel right anymore, or is it just that it feels like a stretch? Is it just that it feels like maybe you're not good enough to do this thing? It was like what I was talking about the other week with imposter syndrome, in the episode titled When You Get Imposter Syndrome with Your Outdoor Adventures. And that was an episode that I did based on a personal experience, and I got such great feedback. There's so many people who are also experiencing this. So like the story that I told in that episode, when I was invited to speak at this ultra event in July, I got huge imposter syndrome. I'm not good enough to give a talk to a bunch of ultra marathon runners. Who am I? I can't do this. I'm not good enough. I have nothing that could possibly be even remotely of interest to say to them. But the race director thought that I did, so here we are. So just always be aware of your mindset and be aware of if there are any fears, blocks, or limiting beliefs that might be getting in the way. And sometimes it can be frustrating. A lot of people that start podcasts give up because they just don't get the numbers that they want, the downloads. A lot of people that start blogging quit blogging because they're not getting the visitors to their websites that they want. That's really when you have to go back to your why. Do you really want the numbers? Is that what you care about? Or do you want to express yourself? And if you want to express yourself, does it really matter if 300 people or 3,000 or 30,000 people are listening or watching or reading? Because sometimes the act of expressing yourself can be enough. But it depends on, again, what's your why? What do you want to get out of it? And sticking with it can be the key to success sometimes. I mean, so many people give up before they've really put in enough effort to something. Or another thing that I see people doing, or that I used to see people doing when I would work with clients, and I just had a chat with a friend about this the other day, is people that are constantly shifting. It's like they try something, they hit a block or they hit a wall or it feels too hard, and then they shift and they pivot. And this is something to watch out for too, because I've seen this so often. What I'm talking about now is pivoting when you really haven't given it a go. Like, I remember this one person that I used to know from business that like every month or every couple of months would completely change her niche for coaching. And she would just do wildly different things. And it was like that. She would start. It wasn't instantly easy. And so she would quit and change. And that's something that's very, very different from what I'm talking about, where you're pivoting after a certain amount of time. So like I was saying in this podcast, over the course of almost 8 years, I've probably had 4 kind of major phases of the podcast. So it was like I was doing something for a couple of years and then it shifted into something slightly different. But I wasn't changing every month or every 2 or 3 months. So if you find yourself doing that, constantly pivoting or shifting or changing like on a very frequent basis, ask yourself, what's going on there? Are you pivoting or changing just because it's gotten hard or challenging? Or is this really the thing that you want to be doing? Could be that you're in a process of rapid growth and learning about yourself and peeling off the layers of masks of things that aren't really you and uncovering the real you at a super fast speed. I don't know. But probably if you're constantly changing things drastically and radically that often, it might be just you're getting stuck and frustrated, and so you give up and try something new. But be aware of what's going on. So again, life is like an ultra. We're in this for the long run. We are in our creative ventures for the long run. How we choose to express ourselves over the years may change, may adapt, may pivot, and that's okay. I used to be really into painting. I haven't painted in years. I miss it, but I just don't have the time and space in my life for that right now. Perhaps I'll pick it up again in the future. That's really another way that I love expressing myself, but don't have the time and space for everything. So be aware of the things that are important to you. I know I've talked a lot about priorities over the years and how to prioritize the things that are important to you. Just be aware, know yourself. This is going back to what I said in the beginning. It's so important to know yourself and to just get to know yourself better and better over the years, because that will help you make good decisions for yourself. That will help you know what's important to you. That will help you know how you want to express yourself creatively, what adventures you want to have, both outdoor adventures and adventures in consciousness. That will help you know what you want to do with these precious few moments, days, weeks, years of our lives. And I think that's what it all comes down to, is using this time wisely and not giving up on things that are important to us, and realizing that we can shift just a little bit and we can get help and we can continue doing the things we want to do even when they scare us, even when the going gets hard, even when it's challenging. And I think there's so much we can learn from these challenging events in our lives. I mean, I've certainly learned so much about myself, and I've learned so much about how strong I am, and I've learned so much about my resilience. And I think these are things that help us to grow. And this last year with COVID and the various lockdowns and restrictions has been rough. It's like this low-level stress that's always been there for the past year. I mean, this time last year, I was on my beautiful 2-week pre-COVID, or just kind of at the start of COVID, but before the first lockdown, adventure where I was camping and hiking, and it was glorious. And that was like my last woo before life got really, really weird. But life has been really, really weird. So if you've not been feeling great lately, give yourself permission to have some more self-care. Give yourself permission to take it easy. Maybe don't push yourself. Do whatever you need to do right now. Be patient with yourself. Be kind with yourself. Acknowledge your achievements. Acknowledge how far you've come. And take the next step, just one step. Even if the whole trail feels hard, even if the whole path towards your goal feels impossible, just take one step. And then once you're there, take the next step. It really is just one step after the other. Plan, train, learn from others to make your journey easier. I'm always learning from other people. I'm always kind of identifying people, whether it's in the creative world or in the sports world or whatever. I'm always identifying people that inspire me, people that I want to learn from, people that I want to kind of model my adventures after. And that's really, really helpful and useful to have that model, to have that example of what this could look like for me if I stick with it, and if I keep working, and if I put in the time, and if I put in the effort and the energy, I could get to where they are if I don't give up, if I stick with it. And again, sometimes quitting is the right thing, but a lot of times people quit too soon and regret it. And if there's ever something that you've quit and regretted, pick it up again, go back, find a way to step back in. It was like with running. I remember saying to my husband so many times, like, don't ever let me forget how much I love running. And yet I would quit. And he would say, you told me to remind you how much you love running. And I'd be like, but not now. I hate it. I'm done. No more. I went through this cycle. I would like start running again, and I would fall in love with it again. And then I would quit, and then I would start, and then I would quit, and I would start. And then I had this long dry spell, and now I'm back. So, you can always come back to most things. And if you can't, or you think you can't go back to a particular thing, think about how you can do something different but similar and pick that up again. And remember, sometimes it's just about showing up and putting one foot in front of the other, literally or figuratively, and just doing the work. And sometimes it starts out hard and it gets easy, and then it gets hard, and then it gets easy, and then it gets hard, and then it gets easy. But life is not a sprint. I always used to say with social media, when I would help people with social media marketing, I always say, social media is a marathon, not a sprint. And life is like that, except it's not like a marathon. It's like an ultra. We're in this for the long run. And whatever it is, whatever goals you have that you really, really want, your dreams, your biggest adventures, all that meaningful stuff that you love doing, that brings you joy, you'll be in it for the long run. And change, adapt, pivot if you need to. But just keep putting one foot in front of the other, and you'll get there eventually, maybe faster than you thought. So that's all I've got for you this week. I hope you found that useful, and I hope that was coherent. I would love to hear from you. Please get in touch. You can email me at holly@hollyworton.com. Let me know if there's something that you're stuck with, or something that you've been thinking about quitting, or something that maybe you're not sure if you want to keep on doing. Or let me know if there's something that you've been doing for years and years and years and you love and you're still doing it. I don't know. Let me know. I would love to hear from you. You can email me at holly@hollyworton.com or find me online and get in touch there. And thank you so much for listening. To be honest, I don't think I would have kept this up for this long if I didn't have many listeners, but I do. So I'm very, very happy to be showing up every week and getting feedback from you and hearing from you. It really keeps me going and makes me very happy to know that people get something out of this show. And I'm not just talking to myself, that it is useful. I mean, that the whole point of this is not for me to just kind of blab on and on each week, but to provide something that's interesting and useful to people and that helps people on their journey. So hopefully this has helped you on your journey today. And as always, if you have any ideas for episodes, I love hearing from people. Last week's episode as well was something that was based on, it was a topic that was based on something that a listener sent me in. I add everything to my list. I've never had a listener email me a topic that was like totally off base. So don't feel like I'm going to totally reject you. It will just go on the list and it will happen sooner or later at some point. So anyway, that's all for this week. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for being here for as many episodes as you have been. I'm very pleased to have been doing this for 400 episodes now, and I don't know, here's to another 400? Who knows? Will podcasts still be around in 8 years? Probably. Anyway, that's all for now. Please visit hollyworton.com/400 for the show notes on this episode. Thank you. Thanks so much for listening to Into the Woods with Holly Worton. You can find more information about today's episode, including links for topics that were discussed, at hollyworton.com. That's HOLLYWORTON.com. If you'd like to connect with other listeners and get support on your journey, I would love for you to join my private community on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Holly Worton. That's patreon.com/Holly Worton. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you next week.